Hello lovely people, and welcome to today's video. I have got some books to talk about that I read during October. I think I've got a total of 6. 4 of them were for various arc review purposes, so I'll talk to you about those as well. But before we jump into this one, I do want to just quickly go off and talk about a short story that I read at the very end of September and completely forgot to mention it in that wrap up, so let's get jumping into that one. This was Garth Nix's Asymmetrical, which was available on the Reactor magazine site, which is connected to the Tor imprint of publishing. This was a short story comical horror about a man who's currently going through like counselling and just struggling internally, who somehow summons a shape-shifting demon with anger problems, unresolved anger problems, and the effects of that transpires in the worst, quite humorous ways possible. This was so much fun. It was dark, it was comical, and at the center of it, it was pretty heartwarming as well. So if you want a quick like 40 if that pages to read and enjoy, definitely recommend this one. Okay, actually diving into October now, I do have some little stats that I thought I could talk a little bit about, because I always like forget to put them in my little reading journal, so they're not ready by the time I do the video. But I had a split pace of 32% being medium and 67% being fast in terms of the type of, you know, pacing in the books I was reading. And I had a little bit of a kind of darker, slower reading month in terms of mood. So I had some tense books, some mysterious books, some dark books, some emotional books, and then a couple that fell into the funny and light-hearted categories, just to break it up a little bit. So let's jump into the first book, one of which was a short story, and it was through Book Sirens, which I think most of the arc books that I've got to talk about today are from Book Sirens, so these were digital arcs. And this is Echo, a horror monster romance, and it's the first book in a Monsters Prey, I want to say it's a duology, by Kat Bethel, and it's a dark romance horror focusing on kind of like mythology, legends, witchcraft, but in a contemporary setting. So trying to escape bad relationship after bad relationship, our main character Madison lucks out when she inherits a beautiful but very fixer-upper, I guess you could say, home and adjacent farmyard woodland in the middle of nowhere. However, she notices very quickly, and especially from talking to some of the locals, that something incredibly menacing is lurking in the tree line. So for this one, I gave a 4 out of 5 stars. Funnily enough, I didn't initially super vibe with the female main character in Madison, but when she began to feel more self-aware, I think I appreciated her as a much more rounded character, I would say. I was also kind of uncertain about the type of monster that Echo was, just off of physicality, but I think the lore building up a bigger picture was helpful in kind of placing him in my mind, and I guess, yeah, seeing the appeal and the lure that he may have had towards Madison and vice versa. The romance and spice aspect of this was also so good. Really recommend it. Again, it's another one of those quick reads too. Next up, another Book Sirens arc. This one is by Blythe Forsyth, and I've got another book to talk about of hers later. This is Crimson Oath, and I gave this one a 4.5 out of 5 stars. It is a vampire fantasy romance. Not quite a romantasy, because when I think of romantasy, I think of like a more older time period, but this one was very much like modern day, I would say. We're following Gabriella, who rules the vampire underworld and is seemingly near untouchable when a menacing and dark ritualistic murder, one that feels eerily familiar in its magic, starts taking place close to home and begins killing off her inner circle. The events force Gabriella to team up with her nemesis, who is a rival to her business of lucrative clubbing spaces, and that is, I want to say, Dante. And of course sparks start to fly. It's very kind of enemies to lovers romance, and it is pretty steamy. The story itself was way more layered and complex than I was expecting it to be, and I was pleasantly surprised with that. I loved having a strong female main character. I felt like she carried the story on her own, but of course I was a sucker for the tropes such as like forced proximity and the very alluring sexual tension between Gabriella and Dante. I also found Gabriella's lore and the connection that she had towards dark magic to be really entertaining and, again, more complex than I was expecting, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. So I definitely recommend this one too if you like your vampire, dark romance, fantasy with an air of mystery and thriller, I guess. Okay, another arc I read, this time being for Black Crow PR and their book tours, this being Coffin Moon by Keith Rosson. It's a horror, it's historical, it's set in the 70s, and we are following a man and his niece who are basically set out on a journey of vengeance to kill the vampire that destroyed and absolutely annihilated their small family. So this one ended up giving a 3 out of 5 stars. I loved that it was filled with such a deep and emotional connection between many different characters, and even more so like deeper heartbreak. I feel like because I connected with the characters in that way and could see like emotional intelligence and just pain and grief, it really led to a more satisfying and heart-wrenching heartbreak, and I loved that. I'm not gonna lie, it did take me a little while to initially warm up to our main characters, Dwayne and Julia, but I absolutely loved how they were bonded in their joint pain and grief, and how that kind of made the story play out. We had a lot of great morally grey characters throughout, and the story overall was very well crafted. Up, I read a much more light-hearted read. This one was Hot for Slayer by Ali Hazelwood, and it's the first in this like monster romance series. I picked it up on a whim because I actually saw another title in this series that I wanted to read, and then I realised, oh, it's like there's more to it, and there's all different authors that have pitched in with their stories. So I thought, I know they're not like sequential or anything like that, but I wanted to start from the first one, right? And that was this, and it was also my first Ali Hazelwood book too. And I will say I will be going more towards her books, especially the ones that are kind of like contemporary fantasy ones. I mean, I already have Bride, and I've recently picked up Mate, which is the sequel to that. So I think those are definitely the ones that I'm intrigued more about in terms of her writing. So when a slayer loses his memories, the only person who can bring him back is the very vampire that he's tried to kill for centuries. Absolutely ate up the enemies to lovers theme in this. I didn't know how much of an enemies to lover girly I was until the last couple of books that I've spoken about, this being another one. The tension between our main characters Ethel and Laszlo was just so full of yearning and spite and just bantering and a good mix of trying to murder each other. Climax of the story, excuse the pun, was lightly spicy, but in keeping with the humour of the narrator and the kind of whole world that they've built up to this point. So yeah, I gave this one a 3.5 stars out of 5, and it's another one I'd recommend. I definitely intend to continue on with this kind of series of short story novella monster romances. Another book by Blythe Forsyth, which I read via Book Sirens, was Lady of Stone. This one I gave a 3 out of 5 stars, so I will say I definitely appreciated Crimson Oath much more, but it's almost a bit difficult to compare them really because they are two very different stories at its heart. With Lady of Stone, we are a much more traditional romantasy. You know, I said earlier how I couldn't really call in my head Crimson Oath a romantasy because of like the setting, the time period, all that sort of thing. This one very much is. It feels very medieval in tone, and very much like wooing and romantic with a little bit of spice, you know. Following Sylvine, who is a clever lady in waiting with a tragic past. She also has a hunger for justice and secretly hones her practice in training to be a knight, even though she knows that she can never really become a knight because of the laws that are stipulated throughout her realm by the king that she serves. So of course it comes as a major shock to the whole of the realm when she is the sole person to pull the sword from the stone goddess statue with absolute ease. This is a fabled weapon, one that is said to completely be able to annihilate this beast that has been terrorizing the local areas and the people of this realm. And it's foretold that this person that can pull this sword from this stone statue will be able to defeat this beast. Of course, with no genuine training other than what she's been sneaking out doing nightly and kind of, you know, doing off her own back, she is faced with this rather doomed quest to defeat this beast. And she's sent with Sir Hal Carrow to slay the Manticore once and for all. I think it's been a pretty long time since I last read kind of like one of these almost prophetic night quest based fantasies, but this was a lot of fun. I really did enjoy it. I loved the sword and the stone kind of inspiration for the bulk of the story. I also enjoyed how it progressed on its own outside of that theme. I would have liked more lore on the goddess and the faith of this world, as well as the magic system here as well. We didn't really hone into much magic, to be fair, but clearly this beast of a manticore is some sort of magical creation, right? So I wanted to know a little bit more about that. And yeah, I just think the lore around the goddess should have been better ingrained so that you could see how impressive and how important that was to the people. It was kind of just flippantly mentioned, and Sylvie didn't even know who she was at that point and had to do like a bit of a study session research to find out more about her lore herself. So I just think it would have been better to be an already established like deity in the world. And of course, I loved the romance in this. It was kind of like friends or acquaintances to lovers, and it was very lovely. The last book I have an actual copy of to show you, and that is horror manga Deserter by Junji Ito. This one I gave a 4 out of 5 stars, and it's a collection of short stories with some of his original earlier pieces, I think, included in this one. The title piece, The Deserter, is that of a vengeful family who keep a deserter from World War II secluded in their home for 8 years, feeding him false information and making him believe that the war is still going on. This as a whole collection was a really great selection of stories. Some notable stories for me were the likes of A Father's Love and The Reanimated Sword. Really enjoyed that one. And there were a couple, I think The Bully, that I remember seeing the TV adaptation for in the Netflix TV show that they did, so it was cool to kind of see like the original basis of that. So my friends, that is it for today's wrap up. I hope you've enjoyed. Thank you so much for watching. Do let me know what you have been reading during the last month or so, what you're currently reading. As usual, I'd love to know. Thank you so much for watching once again. I shall catch you in another video soon. Bye.